Okay, good afternoon. I hope everybody had a good lunch. Looking forward to this afternoon presentation. Um, we had some really good information this morning, and I hope to follow up and fill in some of the some of the blanks when it comes to the investigatory process. It's really important that when we go forward and we look at victim witness intimidation and retaliation, that we are doing everything that we can do to make the law keep its promise. And much of that really includes many of the pointers that were brought out this morning. One of the real important parts being genuinely involved in that collaborative piece. That collaborative piece meaning working day in and day out, formally and informally, with our fellow providers, with our fellow community stakeholders. And it really starts with, I think many of you probably have heard about it, and many of you probably practice it, but really going in with the victim-centered practice, where the victim is the center of all decisions. The victim's choice, their safety and well-being are the focus. And that ties right into making the law keep its promise. Each discipline has their own independent relationship with the victim. The better we work together, the better it is for everyone. And the better it is for everyone because, Steve touched on it when he talked about lethality assessment, when he talked about victim safety. What you have to understand, what you must understand is that victim safety is officer safety. When we look at the officers who are killed in the line of duty across the country, especially by firearm, the percentages are astounding when it comes to how many of those perpetrators have an intimate partner violence type of background, type of history, right? When we look back and see who these people are. And so when we get, these individuals in our crosshairs, we really have to do all we can to hold them accountable. We also have to do this in a trauma-informed response. Once again, Steve touched on trauma, and I'm going to go into it. I'm going to peel it back a little bit more in a little while, and because it's very important that every one of the community stakeholders, not only law enforcement, not only prosecutors, not only judges, but everybody in that coordinated community response have a depth of knowledge when it comes to trauma and the impact of trauma on the victim, and thus be able to effectively attend to the victim's emotional and physical safety. And when we understand trauma, we start to understand why victims make some of the choices that they do. In many of these cases, much of it ties back to trauma and ties back to context. I'm going to talk about context a lot because when we look at that individual's life in context, when we look at what they're dealing with in context, things start to become clear. We start to see why the choices are made. We start to see why, as Steve alluded to, why they present in the manner that they present, why they have issues with memory, why they make the choices to stay when we think we might leave, things and things of that sort. But full development of this trauma-informed response really has to include all disciplines. And it really goes into making certain the more that we take care of the critical needs of victims, the more that victim is going to want to participate. And by participate, I mean want to work with us. So oftentimes I cringe when I hear that we have the victim is uncooperative. I say the victim is choosing not to participate because uncooperative, one, it has a negative connotation, and two, it's not the victim's job to hold the perpetrator accountable. It's our job in the criminal justice system. And the more that we address the critical needs of the victim, the more the victim is apt to want to participate when their safety is taken care of, their physical, emotional, and psychological safety. When we engage in risk reduction, like lethality assessment, and reduction of re-victimization, recidivism. When they have the support to navigate the criminal justice system, when they have the information to be able to effectively navigate, and when they know and are able to access services, when there's active collaboration by all of the stakeholders, when they feel that they can ask questions and get answers, and when they see that justice is available. And this means this is something that's got to be ongoing. This is something that means we are building that relationship with the victim such that we can go back and forth and continue to find out what's going on. It was mentioned earlier with the lethality assessment, that's something that's ongoing, and it absolutely is. I did a lot of work with the lethality assessment development in the state of Maryland, where we developed the lethality assessment protocol, our program. At the time, I was president of the board of the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, and I worked with Dave Sargent and with Dr. Campbell to develop this tool. And one of the things that we found was the collaboration was key, that we needed to have law enforcement talking with the local advocacy, and that we needed to get victims connected to services, because we knew by looking across the country at fatality reviews that many of the victims who were being killed never had access to services. And so we started talking, we started connecting them to services, we started doing these assessments. We realized that when we do these assessments, it is ongoing, and it is something that just because they were assessed at a lower level perhaps this morning doesn't mean that everything couldn't change at the drop of a hat, and things might have changed since this morning, this afternoon, and we have to do it again to make certain, so that we're not assuming things are still okay, so that we're engaging in critical thinking and getting the information. And so, it means going forward and having this knowledge that with that coordinated multidisciplinary response, being victim-centered and trauma-informed, getting the facts and circumstances, engaging in that critical thinking, and making certain we have thorough and documented investigations. And the trauma-informed approach, this framework, really provides a shift that allows us to effectively recognize and account for trauma. Pictured here is a picture of Yardley Love, who was a co-ed down at the University of Virginia, who was killed by her boyfriend, who was also a lacrosse player down there. And there were a lot of things, had there been a trauma-informed response, had we listened to, or had the players down there been knowledgeable about how this individual not only was in an ongoing brutal and dangerous relationship, violent relationship, but how she was intimidated, how she was traumatized, how she didn't want to or didn't feel she could safely come forward. And had she had those wraparound services where law enforcement was attuned to this, where advocacy on campus was attuned to this, there perhaps could have been better outcomes, earlier intervention and accountability for the perpetrator before he finally killed her. So we really want to make sure that our practitioners have the tools and have the abilities to be able to effectively respond, that they have the training that's necessary so that they can know what to look for and know what to listen for, and then, you know, be able to effectively respond. And, you know, supporting and empowering victims is really the key. We have to start by allowing the victim, when possible, to make choices about certain aspects of the interview, and as many of those choices as possible. You know, we want to allow them, if it's possible, to have a supportive person with them in the interview. Allow them to choose the location of the interview. When they come in the room, allow them to choose which seat they want. It means checking in with them as we're going through the interview. And it means allowing them, you know, to really be in as much control as possible. And this is a thing of where we have to take whatever time is necessary to do this, to get it done. You know, oftentimes, you know, in my work with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, I do a lot of executive training. And we have done the Law Enforcement Leadership Institute on violence against women. And in that training, this is for chiefs, deputy chiefs, sheriffs, under sheriffs, the executives in law enforcement. And, you know, I have to tell them directly, you know, too often we are pushing our first responders to get to the call and get it done as quickly as possible and get to the next call. But in these situations, especially when it's an intimate partner violence situation, which a lot of this type of activity happens, this witness intimidation and so forth, we are getting people off calls. We're not giving them the time to put in the effort that is necessary to do that good, thorough investigation. We have to give them the time to be there as long as is needed. And, you know, I would bet all the officers who are on this training that there are calls, even in those busy times, where you're not going to get called off on. You know, and the prime example, what I tell these chiefs, if I'm working midnights and it's rocking and rolling out there. You know, I worked in Montgomery County, Maryland, just north of DC. Right now, you know, population of that jurisdiction, about 1 million, a little over 1,400 officers or 1,200 officers. And, you know, it's rocking and rolling some nights. And, you know, if we're in the middle of one of those nights and I pull somebody over DWI, I doubt my sergeant's going to tell me, you know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes into the call, you know, Thomas, cut that drunk loose and get back in service. No. They're going to give me the time I need to effectively investigate and take care of that call. Why? Because that potential drunk driver is a danger to the public. They're a danger to themselves. We have to see calls like, you know, some of the calls that we go on when it comes to intimate partner violence, when it comes to gang violence, when it comes to these individuals who are involved in this witness intimidation time and time again. We need the time necessary to really analyze that individual who is in our crosshairs and make sure we're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. It means doing that good, detailed, trauma-informed interview. And here, we're talking about that interview that helps us capture information from the part of the brain that the individual is in at the time of the event or was in at the time of the event. You know, if it's a domestic violence event, you know, that individual is going to be in survival mode. They're going to be down here by this red dot, right? They're going to try, and what they're trying to do is survive the event. When we're in that mode, when we're trying to survive the event, certain things are going to happen. You know, we're not going to have, you know, memories are going to be laid down in a fragmented moment because our concentration is on surviving the event, whereas that perpetrator is going to be up in their prefrontal cortex, up in executive brain, where we can address things like, well, if this happens, then I'll do that. Trauma shuts down the executive brain, activating that survival brain. And this style of interview, as I said, as I touched on, really seeks information from the part of the brain activated, during the traumatic event. And this is important to know because when we ask an individual about victim intimidation and about retaliation, when those things happen, many times they're going to be in that survival brain. So we're going to want to ask questions in a trauma-informed manner in order that they can be able to access that information and be able to relay it to us. We want to start with trauma because it really helps to distill myths and misconceptions that impact the pursuit of justice. We want to start with it because it helps us to realize that when the person is traumatized, there may be delayed reporting, such as in a sexual assault, right? And that's the norm. That there's an inability to call details in sequence, right? In a linear fashion. And when we do our questioning, how do we ask questions? What kind of responses do we want? We ask questions in a linear fashion. If we know about trauma, we know that memories are laid down in a fragmented manner. That means we have to ask questions in a way that individual is able to answer them, right? And having that realization of how trauma is laid down helps us to be able to, sorry, it's jumping forward on me. It helps us to be able to ask questions in a manner that the victim can answer it. And in the way that it's stored in their brain. And so it makes us be able to realize that this individual is telling us the truth, and go for things that they can be able to really share with us. Because, in many, without this, we start to look at things in a manner in which, in a stereotyped manner. Because of the way that victim presents and the way that the culture of the agency, the culture of the profession, I should say, has taught us when that individual presents in these ways that they seem confused, they seem to change their story, they're over emotional and all these types of things, they can't get their story straight and all of this. When actually, these are indicators, this is actually evidence of trauma. And when we really take it and capture it in the correct way, then we're putting things into context so that the fact finder, be it the jury or the judge, can see things for what they are. We start with trauma because the victim's first impression absolutely matters. Understanding how trauma impacts that individual, it promotes their well-being. It makes for better interviews because we're asking questions, once again, from the part of the brain that was impacted, and therefore able to get information, able to get evidence that helps our investigations, and able to make the law keep its promise to hold perpetrators accountable. Not understanding it leads to numerous negatives and to a more dangerous environment for everybody involved. We know traumatic events are those things that are overwhelming to the individuals. And in law enforcement, we call them critical incidents, being in a shooting, being in a high-speed chase or something like that. For people in the general public, they're rapes, assaults, car accidents, any type of event that is physically, cognitively, and mentally overwhelming to the individual. That's what we're talking about here. And so this happens all the time, and understanding it really helps us to have better outcomes. We have to realize that, when we're even investigating these, when we're investigating a case of victim witness intimidation, that the victim, because of what has transpired, if they've been intimidated, if they've been retaliated against, that aspect in and of itself is traumatic. And when they talk about it, when we try to get information from them, they're going to tend to, there's going to, with flashbacks and so forth, they're going to be, talking from survival brain. Whereas the suspect, if we ask them questions about it and so forth, they're going to be going from the prefrontal cortex, from rational brain. And on the surface, if we don't know about trauma, who do you think is going to have what seems to be the more plausible story? Yeah, the suspect. Once again, the suspect, I call them, really magicians, because they use smoke and mirrors to try to get us to look the other way while they continue to predate, while they continue to engage in the behaviors they feel they have a right to engage in. And what we're doing is unmasking them. What we're doing is paying attention to the man behind the curtain. And so we have to begin by really acknowledging the trauma, because what we get from victims is directly related to the touch and the sensitivity that we put in when it comes to our investigations. People tell us what we want to know in accordance with the relationship we have with them. And it's about creating that good, strong, healthy climate, a climate that's comfortable for an individual to be able to share things with us. We have to invest the time and the effort. We want to start with open-ended questions about the victim's experience, such as, I'm sorry this happened to you. When you're ready, can you tell me about everything you're able to recall about your experience, right? This is a trauma-informed type of question. We want to be patient. We want to allow the victim to set the pace of the interview. In a lot of times, I'll date myself, when you watch Dragnet or some of these old detective movies, you see the officer, the investigator hammering the individual for information. Usually it's suspects, but sometimes we treat victims like suspects when it comes to asking questions. We interrogate victims. Victims should never be interrogated. Interrogation is reserved for suspects. We interview victims. We interrogate suspects. And we ask questions in this trauma-informed manner because the other types of questions, they tend to be victim blaming much of the time. And we can ask the same types of questions, but ask them in a non-threatening, trauma-informed way. But as we ask our questions, and as we allow victims to set the pace, as we ask in a trauma-informed way, we're going to get a large amount of information, some of which may not be needed, but we're listening for those golden nuggets of what's going on. And in all of these cases, we have to realize that there are going to be why questions that we have to ask. But we can ask them in a way that they're not victim blaming. We want to stay away from victim blaming language. But it's not to say that question can't be asked. Instead of why didn't you report this right away? We can ask something like, can you tell me your thinking on when you decided to report the event. Same question asked in a non-threatening way. All right, we can ask, instead of why didn't you scream or fight back during the incident, when you say this individual, scared you into not coming to court, scared you into this, scared you into that. Why didn't you do that? Why did this go on? Instead of asking it in that manner, we might want to rephrase it, or we would want to rephrase it. What was going on in your mind when you realized that that you were in danger, right? Why did you fail to show up to court? As opposed to, can you tell me what was going on in your mind when you decided not to come to court, right? And that way we can get that information. We can get those facts and circumstances that are going to help us make the elements of the crime of intimidation and retaliation. And that's where, as was alluded to this morning, it's important to know our statutes. It's important to know what statutes cover these types of behaviors, these types of acts. That way we can utilize our investigation to try to establish the elements of those crimes. And so when I'm asking my questions, I'm going to be asking questions that help me to get there, that show, that this individual was in fear, that this individual was coerced, that they were intimidated, right? And it's, for officers, this really shouldn't be something that's foreign to them, because we have to, anytime we make an arrest, what do we have to do? We have to lay the facts on the line. When we establish our probable cause, we have to provide facts and circumstances, right? When we utilize force, if you shoot somebody in the line of duty, you're not going to be able to get away with saying, well, I was in fear. You're going to have to say all of the reasons why you decided to draw your gun and fire. In my training and experience, you're going to talk about furtive movements, you're going to talk about your training and experience, all of these things that led you to utilize that level of force, right? Some more trauma-informed questions. Can you tell me what's going on in your mind when you don't feel safe, right? Trying to find out why the individual doesn't feel safe, trying to find out what the perpetrator is doing to make them not feel safe. And all the while we're doing this, all the while we're pulling this together, we're not just letting this, be there by itself. This should all be done in the context of, what happened before, what's happened during, and what they think will happen after. Because that's going to give you context to show this individual feels intimidated. This individual was retaliated against. Have there been previous occasions in which you were in fear of this individual? Prior acts of domestic violence, prior acts of assault, prior acts of intimidation, prior acts of coercion, right? It's important that we also capture those sensory details. Sensory details are really important when it comes to trauma, because when we're in survival brain, we tend to recall things that are sensory. Those are memories that are really vivid. Sounds, smells, and these are things that can be corroborated, right? Somebody might talk about being in fear of this individual, and the individual might not have said a thing to him, right? And there was one case in which you see the lamp there on the right, and it was a victim who had been raped, and one of the only things that she could continually told the investigator was that there was this ornate wooden lamp on the table in between the beds in the dorm room that she was in. And the investigator said, well, tell me more about the lamp. and say, well, it looked big and it looked heavy. And you know, all I could do was fixate on the lamp. So tell me a little bit more about how that, what you were thinking, how that made you feel. You know, well, I felt like if I got up, if I screamed, if I did anything, he was going to hit me over the head with that lamp. Well, there's the fear, right? But it's something that individual fixated on. And what we know about with trauma is individuals will fixate on that which they see as central to their survival. And that's why that victim's fixated on that. And that's why I said earlier, you know, ask the question, let them talk. You know, what were you thinking? What was going on in your mind? Is there anything about the event that you can't forget? And as they bring things up, tell me more about that, right? Tell me more, getting more in-depth information. When it comes to, you know, in the investigations, in the investigator's mind, many times, you know, she or he might be thinking, you know, why did the victim feel that they couldn't move or scream? And once again, that's where, you know, you're trying to fill in those blanks. You're trying to get that individual to recall things that were going on that made them go there. And, you know, and I'm talking about fear a lot here. I'm talking about danger a lot here, because that's what's involved in this victim witness intimidation time and time again. And so when we think that this is going on, and I'm telling you, when we go back and when we look at it, we'll find time and time again that this is a factor that the victim is having to deal with. Again, that's where the collaborative piece comes in, because they might not even tell me, the investigator, but if I'm working closely with the advocate, whether it's system-based or whether it's community-based advocate, if I'm working closely with them both formally and informally, then we're talking about the different victims that we're serving. And the victim might tell that advocate something that we're not aware of. And the victim might tell that advocate, it's all right for you to tell the officer, you know, especially if we've built that trust, if we've taken the time, we've been victim-centered and so forth. And we can start to corroborate information. We can start to get information that can keep everybody safe in the case. You know, and you know, many times our tendency is to say, you know, what's wrong with you, as opposed to the cultural shift of recognizing trauma and asking what happened to you. And it really will take all of us, from the rookie cop to the chiefs, constantly assessing our approach, holding each other accountable, and finding out the details of what's going on. You know, I have that up on the top right, that's a ceiling tile. Once again, that was something that a victim concentrated on during a case, and was able to give, you know, detail about, because it was an unknown location except for some scratchy information and so forth, and they were able to recall that. And once the investigators started pulling things together, looking at everything in the context, they were able to find the location of the event, and that helped them corroborate things. Down lower, you see the latch on a car door. This was a rape that occurred in a taxi, where a victim was able to give enough detail about what she focused on, what was central to her survival and to her getting out of the car. And these are just to show you examples of things that might come up. You don't know what's going to come up. You have to do the investigation. You have to do the interview. The victim is going to be providing the information for you. It's knowing what to look for and what to listen for, and taking that information and being able to move it forward to help you, to help the case, to help the victim. It's important that, you know, when we're closing our interview with that victim, that we we inform them how to follow up with us. Our close is important as every other aspect of our interview. We want to ask them how they want to be communicated going forward. You know, if we haven't connected them to services, if they haven't spoken with an advocate yet, we want to advise them as to why this is important and how they can go about doing so if we're not lucky enough to be with an agency that has agency-based services, that has a protocol that says when we have victims of a crime, that we bring the advocate in and see if the victim wants to have the advocate from the beginning. And finally, we want to ask them if there's anything that they'd like to add to do, that they'd like to add, or do they have any questions of us, right? And, you know, we've given them the roadmap in order to contact us. We should be making contact back with them. And again, we should be collaborating with our advocate. And then as we're working the case, in analyzing the case, it was mentioned earlier, talking about power and control. These same power and control types of tactics that perpetrator will use in an intimate partner violence type of relationship, they're going to use in order to intimidate, they're going to do to control in order to retaliate against their target time and time again. They're going to use it when they can against us in law enforcement or any intervener. They're going to use it with anyone who they believe will allow them to get away with it, or who does allow them to get away with it. So we want to be ready for them. We want to do our investigation such that we are looking to see which of these tactics are they using? What type of articulation is the victim providing for us that shows that they're doing that? And then once they you know, once it's there, really capture it in a factual manner so it can be used to hold that perpetrator accountable. We want to know, you know, it's important that we are aware of what no looks like and the meaning of the word no when it's said by a perpetrator, or as opposed to a victim. You know, in many times, no can be, well, in any culture, no can be communicated in multiple ways, right? In our culture, many times in a heterosexual relationship, when a man says no, it's the end of a conversation. But in that same relationship, when a woman says no, it's the beginning of a negotiation. No isn't heard the same way. How many ways should a person have to say no before it's taken seriously? That's what has to be asked. And what types of intimidation are used to overcome the word no? So it's looking at these things into context and really, you know, bringing them into focus so that we can see what's really going on. When we look and see why that individual does not want to participate, once again, we see that thing I talked about earlier, fear raising its ugly head once again. So placing the victim's life into context, once again, helps us to see things for what they are. They help us to really view and see why the choices that are being made are being made. How much do they fear the defendant, right? How much and why? How much do they fear the system and why? Some of the fear of the system may be because of what the experience they've had with the system in the past or the people they know. How much fear are they of losing the children? And if they're fear of losing the children, who's telling them they're going to lose the children? It's a form of coercion, right? What's the financial impact? As talked about earlier, when they talked about meet me at the hill where we used to park. How much is loyalty going to come in there? How much, this magician's trick of coercion, it's you and me against them, it's us against the world. And time again, many of these victims really do hope things will change. They have hope for change. They hold on to that hope. They're told by their significant other that they're going to change, right? And they're holding out for that. And one of the reasons for the change, and I'll touch on this in a minute when we talk about the attachment circuitry, but one of the reasons for this hope for change is because in many of these relationships, it wasn't always bad. In many of these relationships, there were some good times. And so that perpetrator will utilize those good times. I mean, they take advantage of that to manipulate the victim into thinking, well, maybe things can revert to that being, what'll happen all the time or most of the time. We in looking at victims, if you read the book, or if you read the book Coercive Control by Evan Stark, he talks about the single most important characteristic of being the victim of battering is that the weight of multiple harms is borne by the same person. So all of these micro or smaller types of harms is inflicted on that one target in an intimate partner relationship. And although the assaults may be considered minor in nature, the frequency and/or continuous nature over time provides a cumulative effect that is far greater than the sum of its parts. Prior assaults, we know, predicts subsequent assaults better than all other factors combined. So the underlying, the question of why a battered individual stay are beliefs that they can exit, right? In other words, that individual, many times people from the outside looking in, why does that victim stay like that in that relationship? I wouldn't stay in that relationship and everything, but that really, there's two things. One, does that victim even know that they can leave, right? When we talk to advocates, they teach us all the time that, sometimes in working with victims, one of the first things is letting them know that they can in fact leave. Don't assume that they know that. And two, they may be in such a horrific or dangerous environment where that choice just literally isn't there, okay? So we shouldn't make that assumption. And, many a times, and we know that they are at the greatest risk when they try to leave. The stats tell us that. So once again, we got to look at these things in context. We've got to look at this fear factor and realize that we know that when that individual makes that permanent decision to leave, and that perpetrator believes that they definitely are leaving, that's where we see the serious assaults, the rapes, and the murders go through the roof. And so we need to know what fear looks like. We need to know what fear sounds like. And then once we realize what it looks like and what it sounds like, then we have to learn how to ask the questions so we can get to what they look like, what they sound like, so we can get to ask questions so that victim's able to tell us, so we can lay the facts out so the individual can be heard. This first, and these are tough to watch and tough to listen to. And so I want to warn you about that ahead of time. But, I want you thinking, if I were to be questioning a victim and I wasn't privy to this video, I wasn't privy to this recording, what kind of questions would I ask them to get to the intimidation, the fear that they are in as a result of the environment that they're in?
get that from me. And I was mad at her. One time I will never forget it, you know? Forget that. But you a stinky motherfucker like you is. You go down there and take pictures, man, to make sure I can't get it out. You gotta be so called scared, I'm gonna fuck you up.
I didn't ask you to take pictures of me. You put me up against the wall in front of
You ain't had no fucking business going down there. Wait. Why in the hell did you leave from right there, though?
They told me to.
They don't tell you what to do. And look at you, man. You a sniveling asshole. About nothing. I'm the one to be sniveling and crying. I'm the one sitting in that fucking rat hole. You ain't spend no day in the fucking rat hole. Man, I didn't know how to tell me what you can do, what you can't do. You don't have to go and face no judge and tell him nothing. You ain't took care of me now, damn time. You done a motherfucking thing for me since I know you, Lois. You know that? Hey, do you see where I'm coming from? Hey, I took 7 years out of my life that I gave to you, man. I paid for your ass to eat, sleep, and have a place to live. With all these kids, I pay all these motherfucking bills, right? Huh? But you go down there and take pictures so motherfuckers can keep me in jail. Just because I kicked your fucking ass. And if I wanted to kill you, Lord, I'd have broke your fucking neck right there. I mean, something tell me, man, that you don't believe me.
I do believe you, but I thought you were going to kill me and not me too. That's what I was afraid of.
If I meant to kill you, Lord, I'd have killed your ass.
But I'm not saying you didn't mean to. You didn't hit me so hard that you would have killed me. Not that way.
Oh, yeah, well, then why you go down there and take pictures?
Because I thought you might do it again without potentially trying to kill me. I wish you could know what you did. Because I knew what you were doing, you didn't know.
No, I think it's all senior motives again. If you want to show me that, you don't beat my ass.
No, I didn't.
You don't beat my ass, and I don't do nothing about it. I'm going to have your ass locked up. I'm going to put your ass in prison. But I'm going to tell you something. You are lucky. And you say, look, you better start saying your prayers, Jack. Because the next time if something like this occurs, I'm going to call this judge. I ain't calling no motherfucker again. I don't want him to be involved. I'm calling the judge. I'm going to have motherfuckers come to California and fuck your ass up. You understand that? Now, I'm serious. Now, I'm tired of bullshit with you. I'm tired of bullshit with these fucking police. I'm tired of bullshit with the damn judge. Now, I'm tired of the whole damn thing. And when I go to court again, let me tell you something. You can play that sniveling shit and you can tell me what I said. You understand what I'm saying? You can tell them what I said, and they can keep me in that motherfucker. But I guarantee you a week later, bitch, there won't be enough of you left for this fucking ass. And if you think I'm joking, Mother, try it. Just try me.
All the damn rules in this house, and you gonna sit over there and keep lying as you getting your whooped on the floor. You don't know what to do. You follow me to the T. You follow what I say to the T. T. You know what to do. I waste my time telling you what to do. Break all the rules on so that much you don't know what to do. I tell you to follow me to the T. Don't I? Don't I? Get your off that floor and sit up, stand up, and tell me you don't know what to do again. You stand up and tell me you don't know what to do again, Helper. You stand up and say it again, you don't know what to do. You follow me to a T. Sit your stupid on that. You follow me to the T. You understand what T means? Do you understand what T means? Now tell me again you don't know what to do. Tell me again you don't know what to do. You do what?
Follow you to the T.
Look at me, bitch.
I think clearly you can see and you can hear what fear looks like, what fear sounds like. And, do you think that these victims in both of those cases, retaliating against their target for talking to the police, maybe, when they weren't even the ones who called the police, do you think that they'll show up in court willingly? That they want to show up in court, given the reality of their existence? Do you think that their perpetrator will attempt to intimidate them if they do? I mean, you see what they were doing to them there. And thus, what will you look for and listen for? What will you ask that victim when they come in front of you to see what's going on, to find information such that you can try to address that victim's critical needs, to keep them safe, and everything else that they're in need of. And the one in the tape, the Lola tape, within 10 days of that tape being recorded, she was murdered by her husband. The second victim was luckier. The second victim, the law enforcement found out about it because her employer actually asked police to go to check her welfare. And that's, I won't get into all the depths of that story. And, that was filmed. He made his 12-year-old son, I believe he was 12 at the time, make that recording so he could watch himself later. That's how much of a narcissist and control freak he was. But it goes to that intimidation, that instilling of fear. Lola, the first one, the retaliation for going down and talking to the police before, for taking pictures for the police, for the investigation and so forth. And so, in both of these cases, when we have Lola in front of us, when we have that second victim in front of us, what are we doing to now not only do a thorough investigation to make certain going forward, we're trying to take care and keep them safe and keep us safe. I said victim safety is officer safety. What did that suspect say? Whether or not he was going to follow through, he told her what he was going to do to the police too if they came up in there. And we know time and time again, these suspects will act on those types of things. So it's important that we be cognizant of all of that. It's important to be also to understand, when we talk about trauma and we talk about the way the brain works and we talk about choices victims make and trying to make sense of why an individual might stay or something, understand that, in intimate partner violence, victims are often, asked why they didn't fight back, why they stayed, why they changed their story, why they didn't show up in court. And a better way to make sense of their response is thinking about the offender dynamics and how they impact the victim and the victim's choices. We know that in many of these cases, the offender, at least in the beginning stages of the relationship, they don't announce their intention to be abusive, to assault, to do these negative things. They play nice and work hard initially, at least, to avoid giving any indication that they represent a threat. And this process, it really activates the attachment circuitry. It's a type of grooming, really, and that attachment circuitry allows us to connect emotionally with others. What's crucial to understanding this dynamic, the dynamic of most intimate partner violence, is that activating this attachment circuitry both creates confusion in the brain and suppresses the defense circuitry. When the perpetrator begins pushing boundaries and engage in behaviors that activate the defense circuitry, it creates neurobiological conflict that is literally confusing the brain. Trauma, once again, at work. The same person that activated that victim's attachment circuitry is now also activating their defense circuitry, resulting in this confusion. The victim's experience of fear is thus even more intensified when they realize that this is really happening. And this combination of fear triggers a powerful sense of mental defeat. The victim's brain appraises the event as inevitable and unescapable, or escape as impossible. And so, you know, the more that we understand trauma, the more we understand the importance of context. The more we understand how seemingly innocent behavior could be devastating to someone else if we don't understand the context of receiving those flowers. We are challenged to put the behavior into context and show it for what it truly is. In this case, you know, if this individual receives flowers from the outside looking in, person might say, you know, well, I'd love to get flowers or everything, but I've got to ask that victim, what do those flowers mean to you? And what we have found in especially in many stalking cases is that individual knows that's a signal from the perpetrator that the perpetrator will let them know, when I give you flowers, that's the day I'm going to put you in your grave. Something to that extent. That's that magician, that wolf in sheep's clothing, that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, who is really making it look on the surface that they're doing something innocent when they're doing something that's really terrifying. And we have to be able to see how it's misconstrued, how it can be misconstrued. Questions? I know I rocketed through a lot of information. I was trying to stay on time, and I think we are right on time. So this is your opportunity to really ask any follow-up questions of some of the things that I went over. And, you know, one of the, I forgot to mention, one of the tools that we can utilize when we're trying to get information is controlled communications, and this is something you're going to want to check with your local prosecutor on making, you know, pretext communications, whether it's through a phone call, text, email, where we find that it's safe for the victim, where many times we'll partner with the local service provider, with an advocate, systems-based or community-based, to call and or text or whatever and get feedback from the suspect that's going to help us with the case, that's going to implement them in the case. The laws with respect to that really differ across the country when it comes to what class of crime that can be utilized for. I know in most states for sexual assault and so forth, for felony level type crimes, it's permissible. But that is one tactic. Other questions that you might have? Richard, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm seeing just some questions about PowerPoint and resources being shared, which we will after the webinar. So if you do have a question, please submit it through the Q&A function. We'll give folks another minute or so since we are running on schedule to submit something. Let's see. So there is one question. What about the intimidation that happens in family court cases where there is no criminal case or the criminal case is already over, but the parties are still in a divorce or custody battle? Are there any protections for victims then?
Well, if the intimidation rises to a criminal level, there definitely is. I think in any instance, we want to get as many facts and circumstances about the behavior that's being engaged in, because I would think even in a civil case, that's going to be a detriment to the other side when that information is brought to light in the court case. That's where whatever counsel is representing the victim at the time needs to be made aware, and they then need to do what's necessary in order to make certain that those facts are brought into the case. I know I have been in cases, I've represented victims as an expert in cases and testified to that very type of thing in the past. The type of behavior that the perpetrator was engaging in to intimidate, to retaliate against the victim, and correlated it to some of the things that were going on in prior to them coming up to the court case at hand. And these are most of these instances were civil cases, divorce cases, where a victim was trying to get away from their abusive spouse.
Thanks, David. We have another question. Do you find law enforcement is understanding of victim sensitivity, or are you still finding that that they have the mindset that why do they stay? You said that living in a rural area, this is something that they see a lot.
Yeah. This is something we're seeing less of, but we're still seeing, in my view, we're still seeing too much of across the country. And this is a culture shift that really that I know I've been working to try to get to grab hold for some time now. But that's why, earlier I mentioned that we at the IACP have been doing the Law Enforcement Leadership Institute against violence against women that was for specifically targeting chiefs, deputy chiefs, the executives. We also have a training that targets mid-level supervisors, lieutenants, sergeants, captains, and then we have a training that targets first-line supervisors. Because at every level of law enforcement, there's a responsibility. And those individuals, they need to be trained as well. They need to realize why they need to adopt the victim-centered, trauma-informed approach, and make certain that they do what's necessary to change the culture such that victim blaming is something of the past, and so forth. And you say, well, how do you get them to pay attention? Well, you get them to pay attention by one, answering that what's in it for me. Part of what's in it for me are my fellow men and women going home safe day in and day out. In a lot of agencies, I taught defensive tactics and physical training for 15 years for my agency. I was the lead instructor there. I was a SWAT team member. I was a hostage negotiator. And one of the most important things that we were ever told or I ever taught was your number one duty is to go home safe. When we show statistically how many officers are hurt, injured, and killed by perpetrators, for instance, of intimate partner violence, and show how often we have had an opportunity to intervene and we didn't take it seriously enough, people start to pay attention. When we show that on the average, when there's a domestic violence homicide, we've been there 5 times before. So the question is, what did we do everything we could when we were there those previous 4 times, right? And when we put that connection between the individual who kills the police officer ultimately who kills a police officer with a firearm, and that individual has been had for these type of events before. What could we have done in the past to make certain that that individual never got to the position where they killed a cop? When we start talking about, we look at these mass violence incidents that have happened, whether it's in Las Vegas or up in Pittsburgh or down in the club in Orlando, Florida. All of those individuals had a history of intimate partner violence. What did we do? What did we do to effectively keep firearms out of their hands and effectively hold them accountable? We found in these cases time and time again, we didn't do as much as we could have. In retrospect, yeah, we could have done a lot more. So that means we have to respond more effectively in every aspect of what we do in law enforcement. And that includes making certain that we put that victim-centered, trauma-informed response at one of the main things that we are pushing our officers to do, because it's about the safety of everybody involved. And it's about making the law keep its promise. It all fits in nicely together. As long as we continue to do things that we did in the past, when we don't recognize these things, when we don't address it in that way, all we're doing is playing into the hands of the perpetrator. That's what I like to call the magician, using the smoke and mirrors, using their tricks, making certain we don't we pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Thank you, David. I'm trying to look through these questions, see which ones kind of relate to our conversation today. Let's see here. Here's a good one. With local police departments being short-staffed and heavy caseloads, how do we get them to make more of an investment in really hearing DV victims to help with a better outcome within the court system?
Well, I think it's once again, it's putting the time and the effort in the calls that is necessary. In each of those systems that we're talking about that are, they're holding calls, they're doing this and that and the other, they will make a priority when they feel one is warranted. And that's why I gave the example of the DWI. We're still, when we make that DWI stop, we're not just cutting drunks loose. We're not without doing a good, thorough investigation. Because of the danger involved, were we to do that. That would be dereliction of duty. These types of cases have to be seen in the same light. And overall, you're going to cut down, in the long run, you're going to cut down on recidivism because we took care of it right the first time, not going back to the same home again and again and again. In the long run, you end up spending less time because you're taking care of it effectively the first time out. And there's all kinds of training available to do every aspect of what I'm talking about. The training is available. We'll train the trainer. But these are things that we can't force agencies and communities to do. They just need to take advantage of those resources that are available to them. There's still a good bit of grant money out there in order to bring training in, should they not have the resources to do the training themselves. At the state level, there's all kind of VOCA funds that help that will also address some of the training and technical assistance issues here. So, and a lot of times, on agencies, it takes one or two people who are really dedicated to getting these things done to apply for those grants and so forth, so they can get their agency and their community properly trained.
Looks like we have time for one more question. And this question asks if there is any ICP language to encourage law enforcement to meaningful partner with community-based organizations, or to include advocates at the scene when they've completed or near completion of interview at the scene?
We've got some documents. If you send me my information's there on the screen, and I'll send you, I can connect, see exactly what you're looking for, and then point you in the right direction so that you can get that information.
Look, we may have time for one more. And this asks, how can we approach state attorney offices to prosecute abusers more adequately? The officers in my area do a great job in making arrests and using trauma-informed approaches with victims, but our state attorney offices are either dismissing these cases or giving court supervision. There any feedback on that?
Yeah, that's where Equitas comes in. You know, the folks that kicked us off this morning. In fact, I've been collaborating and doing co-trainings with Equitas for probably over 10 years now. And that's where it's, you know, we were just down in Rockdale, Georgia. In the last year, we did 2 major trainings down there, and we'll probably be down there again this year. But working with the prosecutors at the same time as working with law enforcement, not only getting them to collaborate and work together effectively, but making certain they were on the same page when it comes to victim-centered, when it comes to trauma-informed, when it comes to all of these different aspects, these different elements of really making a good, sound criminal justice response to, you know, victim witness intimidation, to intimate partner violence, to gang violence, to all of these things. And so, you know, it's in my book, anytime, you know, I was so glad that NCDC set this up this way, because you have practitioners from different professions working together, like we all should be out there in the real world, in order to really affect lasting change, to make the law keep its promise, to hold perpetrators accountable, to keep our community safe. So I would say Equitas, though, is really the ones who I would start with. And, you know, hopefully, you know, we could partner with them like we have in the past and so forth, depending on the game plan that they would come up with. But I would start with them. They are definitely hands down who you want on your team when it comes to addressing the state's attorney or the prosecutor's office.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David, for
Sure.
your incredible presentation. I have had the opportunity to see him present on a few different issues, so it's always good to learn new stuff, and I really do appreciate it. And of course, we'll be seeing you in the future.